This is the God question that is at the root of all theological inquiry. You can see that it is really just an extension of the philosophical question, but it's just the physical parameters of the exploration have been expanded. It moves from the physical realm to the so-called metaphysical realm. The assumption is that if, in fact, these UFO vehicles are coming from a different star system that may be in one of these other galaxies that is as much as 6 to 8 billion years older than we are, these beings have had that much more time, 6 billion years more, to explore these very questions.
My name is Danny Sheehan. I'm a constitutional litigator who's worked some of the most important cases in modern American history. From Pentagon Papers, the Watergate scandal, to Iran-Contra. My legal career has led me now to this pivotal moment. As our human family confronts the implications of the existence here on our planet of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional non-human species. I will be your guide as we dive into the profound philosophical, theological, and public policy questions pertaining to the UFO phenomenon, alien life, and the citizen movement for disclosure. This is the Full Disclosure Podcast, coming to you from the New Paradigm Institute on SpectraVision Radio.
We have just come out of a temporary partial shutdown of the United States government. It was only temporary, and now both the House and the Senate have passed the annual budget, the proposed annual budget appropriations for this year, for 2026, recommended by President Trump and approved by the Republican Party. Enough of the Democrats have finally succumbed to agree to this, with the exception of authorizing the renewal of the Department of Homeland Security and the ICE agents. That's been postponed for a 6-week period. That's the sort of big story that's going on as tens of thousands of Americans march in the streets opposing the Trump administration policies, the underlying policies with regard to the deportation, the arrest and sweeping up and putting into detention camps some 73,000 undocumented Central American aliens and various American citizens and various illegal immigrants in the country, while the Trump administration sorts through them and decides who to deport to what countries. There's sort of general mayhem in the country over this particular issue. There are some 20 different installations that the Department of Homeland Security was attempting to lease or purchase around the country to house twice as many incarcerees. This is going on now, but the people in all of those areas, many of them deep red areas of the country, are totally opposing allowing such a detention facility in their congressional district or in their town. As all of this is going on and the continued crises that are going on around the world, 4 leading UFO-related stories are taking place in the past week since we were together last. The first of which is the continuing reverberations on Capitol Hill of the January 20th National Press Conference that was convened by James Fox, the producer and director of the second installment of the Moment of Contact. This is the story about the crash landing of a UFO down in Virginia, Brazil, 20 years ago. The doctors that had done the physical examination of the ET being that was recovered from that crash came and testified. The follow-up is that Congressman Eric Burleson, who is the one who holds the portfolio inside the House of Representatives on the UFO issue, has now interviewed personally over on Capitol Hill in his office these witnesses, so that information is now flowing into the task force on the declassification of government secrets. So there's a lot of news that's still reverberating around that set of events. The second major news item is that a closer examination of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2026 reveals that for the fifth year in a row, there are some provisions in the National Defense Authorization Act pertaining to the UFO phenomenon. The first of these two provisions pertaining to the UFO phenomenon that are in the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, the first of them is the requirement now from Congress that the executive branch report to the Congress each and every one of the intercepts by any U.S. military forces or any encounters by civilian craft with UFOs that are reported to NORAD or to the NORTHCOM defense facilities. This has to be reported to Congress now, and it goes back to January 1st of 2024 and is required to proceed from this point forward as of December 22nd of 2025. Okay, the second item is that the Congress has required AARO to officially report to Congress any and all UAP security classification guidelines that are issued from the Defense Department or AARO governing the reporting requirements. Now, if there's any changes or supplements to any of those guidelines, these now need to be reported to the AARO office. We see here that Congress continues to rely upon AARO as the repository of this information, despite the fact that it's now demonstrated over and over again that AARO is not, in fact, engaging in any type of follow-up whatsoever to any of these reports. They're just warehousing these reports, and now they need to be turned over to the Congress. So this is the fifth year in a row where there's something in the National Defense Authorization Act pertaining to the UFO issue, but still we notice that there's still no genuine substance being provided. The major military services and intelligence agencies and Defense Department agencies are still not turning over information that they possess about the UFO phenomenon and about the non-human intelligence that is understood to be responsible for the UFO phenomenon. That virtually none of them are turning over anything of substance to the National Archives, even though they were commanded to do so by the United States Congress back in 2023. So this process of having to figure out what Congress is going to do, if anything, about that, to compel the compliance with their orders, is still not been included in any legislation as of now. The third major story that's been going on, as we reported in the last episode, the Vermont state legislature has introduced a bill to establish a state-level UFO task force to investigate all assertions of sightings anywhere in the state of Vermont, to set up a major task force to evaluate any of these contacts and to undertake an analysis to try to ascertain what these contacts really represent. Now, in response to that, the Washington Post published an opinion piece authored by Michael Shermer, a noted skeptic, indeed a debunker of all UFO sightings. It's a fairly extensive opinion piece in the Washington Post. It was published on February 2nd, and he goes on at some length, with the megaphone of the Washington Post, asserting that Shermer has divided all of the information about UFO sightings into three different categories. The first category is all of things that are misrepresentations, misidentifications, confusing natural phenomena for UFOs, that there being no UFO or any kind of unidentifiable craft involved whatsoever, in which he relegates all the sightings and says so. Now, the second category is that what might be Russian or Chinese craft of some advanced form, including drones, which he then also dismisses, saying that it's totally unlikely that any of these sightings are actually Russian or Chinese. And then he has a third category, which are the real genuine UFOs, which all of the legislation and all of the activity on the part of the United States government has already acknowledged are real and unknown, which Michael Shermer actually relegates to longing on the part of people in an age of the limiting of faith in any kind of spiritual realm as some kind of new substitute, a new religion that he keeps castigating all of this for, completely ignoring all of the overwhelming evidence that has convinced the Congress that this phenomenon is real and has convinced major leaders inside the federal government that the origin of these UFOs are a non-human intelligence, almost all of them believing this to be extraterrestrial. So this is the Washington Post trumpeting the blatherings of this guy, Michael Shermer, who is a noted debunker of all UFO issues. The most important of all of these stories is the fourth story. Friday, January 30th, UAP Gerb, a very widely respected UFO podcaster, has released a 3.5-hour video in which he lays out in some extraordinary detail what he understands to be the infrastructure of the entire UFO program inside the United States government, ascertaining where the UFOs are, forcing down a number of these, taking them captive, reverse engineering the technology, attempting to construct military equipment out of the technology, storing the UFOs in a facility where they can't be found, and moving them around to keep the public from knowing where they are, and also mounting a major disinformation campaign to convince people that this isn't true. This is an extraordinary piece of work that has been done by UAP Gerb. And this is going to require some time to do an in-depth evaluation of this information, which our New Paradigm Institute is engaged in doing at the present time. And because of the depth and detail, it's much too soon since just last Friday to really have any public response to this at this point in time. Last week, we began the process of trying to come to grips with this call that has been issued by the Roman Catholic Church, among others, calling for an intense discussion among the laity or the civilian population and the citizenry of the profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by the anticipated discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. In light of the discovery process now being actively underway with the participation of Congress and a number of the federal executive agencies, this is the time for that discussion to take place. We at the New Paradigm Institute have all expanded this to the need to discuss not only the profound philosophical and theological questions, but also the major public policy questions that are posed to our human family by the discovery of not only life elsewhere in the universe, but the discovery of another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed but distinctly non-human species right here in our own galaxy, which, all importantly, have been members of which have been visiting us and coming and going from our planet and being recorded on radar and on videos, being seen by our submarines under the water. This is an extraordinarily important moment, despite the fact that the mainstream media has not really taken this up to the point where the overwhelming majority of people in the United States are yet engaged in a hue and cry, demanding that our government explain to us what it is that's happening here. Okay? What we want to do today is we want to continue the opening discussion that we began last week to address this particular issue that the November 2009 call directly issued by the Vatican of the Catholic Church, asking for the citizenry to engage in this set of conversations, directed our attention to the philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. My personal opinion is, which I've shared at our New Paradigm Institute, is that the philosophical questions are distinct and different from the theological questions. And so what we want to do is we want to address what the distinctions are between the philosophical questions and the theological questions, and what the relationship is between the two of these, at least in my judgment. Okay? And that is that the philosophical questions that are posed to us really have to do with trying to understand what the relationship is between our perception of physical reality, kind of scientific reality, and what the implications are for moral judgments, making normative judgments about human conduct to comport our conduct in harmony with these actual physical facts having to do with the material realm, and what our reflections on these ethical questions and moral questions are. And this has to do with all of the factual reality, the material reality, if you will, the physical reality that goes on within the physical contours of our material universe. This is made up of the sum total of all of the ultimately irreducible integers of matter, physical matter, in the universe. And what are these physical laws, and what are these relationships, and what is our relationship to them as a human species, and how, if at all, can we derive any type of moral referent from this reality to give us some insight into what type of conduct we ought to engage in, either individually or collectively. This is the long philosophical discourse that goes on. On the other hand, the theological question really arises when you get outside of the physical boundaries of the material universe. What is it that preceded the existence of our material universe? What might continue to exist even if our material universe continues to expand and disintegrate, such that it disintegrates into virtual nothingness? What is this process all about? What's going on exterior to the sum total of all the mass and energy in our universe? And what role, if any, does the pre-existent reality to our material universe play in this, again, philosophical set of questions about what are the sources of normative principles pursuant to which we can organize our conduct collectively, and pursuant to which we as individuals ought to conduct ourselves. So this is the relationship, the fundamental relationship between the philosophical and the theological questions that are posed to us. So that the question that arises is, what has all of this got to do with the UFOs? We know now from our latest computations undertaken through the Hubble telescope and the Max Planck telescope and the James Webb telescope and the other space-bound observatories now, that our physical universe, the sum total of all the matter in the universe, the mass and energy, appears to have been in material existence for some 13.8 billion years. And galaxies and star systems have been a part of that manifestation for 13.8 billion years. We have, in fact, discovered through the James Webb telescope a galaxy that is now estimated to be 13.5 billion years old. This is just 300 million years short of the initiation of our whole universe. This is shocking to the world of science, but they've now discovered that. And now our star of our solar system is only 4.5 billion years old, actually almost 4.6 billion years old. Our planet is only 3.7 billion years old. So when you compare the 3.7 billion years of our planet and even if you are liberal and grant a billion years to the life process on our planet that has resulted in the Homo sapien species that we are, even if we're a billion years old, our particular species, there are star systems in our universe that could be as much as 8 billion years older than us. And that means that there could be planets around these stars that are as much as 8 billion years in advance of us, which means that the sentient beings, even if it took them a similar billion years to actually evolve on those planets that can sustain or generate life, it means that they've had some 7 billion years more to direct their conscious attention to these fundamental questions, both philosophical and, one might assume, theological, that they may well have come to also pose the question to themselves is, how did our whole physical universe come into being? Did it get enfolded into being in the material realm out of some pre-existent infinite, that is infinite, and eternal sea of otherwise completely undifferentiated consciousness? Now, this is the God question that is at the root of all theological inquiry. And yet, if you think about it differently, you can see that it is really just an extension of the philosophical question, but it's just the physical parameters of the exploration have been expanded. And in fact, it moves from the physical realm to the so-called metaphysical realm. That is a realm of potentially physical reality going on, but it's at such a level that it's impossible for us to measure this subtle dimension of non-material reality. Now, this becomes important, as I point out, because the assumption is that if, in fact, these UFO vehicles are coming from a different star system, even within our own galaxy, but especially if they're coming from any place outside of our galaxy that may be in one of these other galaxies that is as much as 6 to 8 billion years older than we are, that would indicate that these beings have had that much more time, 6 billion years more, to explore these very questions. So, if in fact beings from another extraterrestrial civilization are coming and going to our and from our planet, and especially if they are in communication with our members of our human species, not just the individuals, which is extraordinarily important from all the thousands of reports of direct physical face-to-face encounters that citizens have provided of engaging with these extraterrestrial beings and engaging in telepathic communication with them. But very importantly, if any of these beings are in direct communication with any of the officials of our United States government or any other nation state governments on our planet. And we have the recent revelation back on November 21st of 2025, the Dr. Eric Davis in the Age of Disclosure specifically asserted that he was told by President George H.W. Bush that in fact back in 1964, which would be around April 30th, between April 26th and April 30th of 1964, that these 3 UFOs came to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. And one of them landed, and a non-human being exited the craft and actually met with 2 uniformed, high-ranking United States Air Force officers and 2 plainclothes United States government representatives, and went into a hangar and actually had a fairly protracted telepathic set of communications. Now, if this is true, what this means is that we are either in the process of or on the very brink of being able to have direct communications, more likely in the process of having direct communications with sentient, intelligent beings who have explored these fundamental, profound physical and theological questions for potentially 6 to 8 billion years longer than we have. While in fact we are all in awe of those rare individual human beings, members of our Homo sapiens species, who seem to have evolved to a level of spiritual consciousness where they are capable of displaying certain types of what we call siddha, or talents, of being able to predict the future, actually see the future, to be able to engage in telepathic communication, to engage in astral travel by location, the healing of other sentient beings merely by the laying out of hands. These types of talents that the UFO beings tend to be displaying, according to the reports of hundreds of people who've encountered them. This would indicate that these talents that are displayed by some individual human beings, members of our human species, may be the precursor to these types of talents and capabilities or siddhas possessed by our human family. Okay? This is revelatory because this seems to be the realm in which the spiritual discussions take place among our citizens. These talents, they call them charisms, of these extraordinarily high consciousness human beings display. This all seems to be the realm of theological studies and spiritual studies. So this is an extraordinarily important event that's taking place right now. Our encounter with these extraterrestrial beings who may well have extraordinarily deeper insights into the answers to these philosophical and theological questions. So this is the time for us to start having these types of discussions so that we can prepare to encounter this information in a way that we're better prepared to integrate it into our understandings of what type of normative principles might be appealing to us as human beings in accordance with which to conduct our conduct. Okay. And very importantly, to potentially govern our interaction and future relationships with the extraterrestrial civilization. Because if, in fact, they have evolved a discernment of these normative principles and have comported their conduct with that, that's going to be able to give us a much greater assurance that they're not going to be engaging in some type of aggressive or abusive conduct toward us, and that we are going to be capable of learning much more from them in these philosophical and theological areas. Okay, so what we're going to be doing in the future episodes is we're going to be exploring some of these philosophical questions, some of these theological questions, as well as some of these major public policy questions that are posed to our human family, pertaining to how we should potentially amend some of our structures on our planet, our geopolitical relationships with each other among the nation states, our economic structures that we have, our religious institutional structures. This is a very important conversation that we need to have. We've been called upon to have this as early as November of 2009, even by the Vatican itself. That's not suggesting that everybody ought to respond to say, oh, whatever the Catholic Church says was something we ought to do. But what it is indicating is that the people who devote their entire lives directed to these fundamental questions are in fact calling upon us now openly, publicly, to have these conversations. So if in fact one is in need of some sort of authorization to engage in these kind of conversations without thinking that you're engaged in some sort of occult discussions, then this is the authorization that you've been waiting for. This is going to be the realm of the studies of the New Paradigm Institute, looking into these philosophical, theological questions, as well as the public policy questions. So we invite you to come back again next week when we will continue this discussion. This is Dan Sheehan. I'm coming to you from the New Paradigm Institute over SpectraVision Radio.
To join the citizen movement for disclosure, visit newparadigminstitute.org/take action.